What connects the two uncrowned kings of Ireland? The Irish-born Duke regarded as the greatest general in British military history, Ireland's greatest architect, the Irishman who designed the White House, and the Irishman who ordered it burnt to the ground. With Irish Freemasonry, ancient Egypt, the Knights Templar, and the Dublin Hellfire Club. Dublin's Obelisk, Chapter 2 of An Untold History of Ireland, tells the many unusual tales behind the monoliths which are dotted around the city and the men in whose honour they were built, men who had a profound effect on not only Irish but world history. Ireland, and Dublin in particular, has a large concentration of obelisks. We find them in parks, housing estates, the countryside, city centres, hilltops, and roundabouts. On the main thoroughfares, and even on the grounds of the Irish government buildings. Many have associations with or were built by Freemasons or in honour of prominent men who were Freemasons. Their presence has piqued the curiosity of many, but gone unnoticed by even more.
So this is the home of the Grand Lodge of Ireland, the administrative centre, if you want, the administrative body of Irish Freemasonry, the governing body, the sovereign body of Irish Freemasonry. And Grand Lodge of Ireland has met here since 1869. The building was actually made for them. It was made by them and for them. It's a purpose-built building. Grand Lodge of Ireland dates back to 1725. That's the start date we have. Now, it's probably a couple of years older than that. But there's no actual record of the foundation of Grand Lodge of Ireland.
No, not necessarily. I think that obelisks can be Masonic, but on the other hand, they may not.
Obelisks are very definitely Freemason, and they've been put there. They've been put there almost as encouragement to members of the organisation to say that here we are, we're doing our thing, we're looking after you, and other Masons will recognise these symbols and in much the same way as a Christian would recognise a cross.
Well, they are and they aren't, in that it seems natural to assume that the phallic tradition, phallic worship tradition, which modern obelisks would probably hark back to, would precede that of organised religion or Freemasonry. So in that way, there wouldn't be a connection. However, as with many other things, the Freemasonic societies do appreciate and do try to incorporate ancient understandings in their architecture, in their symbolism, in their monuments. They are connected to Freemasonry, in that if we look at most of the designers of the major obelisks around Europe and America, we find that it would be Freemasonic architects that would be behind it. So whether there is a direct connection or not, we can't exactly say, but we certainly see that Freemasons certainly have a tender spot for Egyptian thought, let's say, and for obelisks. Now this brings up a myriad of other possibilities, because the tradition of obelisks goes back much further than religion as we know it.
No, not necessarily. I think that obelisks can be Masonic, but on the other hand they may not. This sounds a bit odd, but nevertheless they can be used for Masonic purposes and they can not be. The connection, of course, is because of Freemasonic connections with ancient Egypt, or claims to have connections with ancient Egypt through the learning of geometry and the building of ancient artifacts.
The Freemasonic Egyptian question is actually a very interesting one. First of all, because Freemasonry doesn't claim any lineage with the Egyptian mystery schools as such, or with Egyptian thought. However, we do see, in terms of their symbolism and their architecture, we see Egyptian thought and Egyptian philosophy represented consistently through Masonic architecture. We can go to the obelisk, for example, which itself harks back to the Osiris concept, of the shaft of Osiris. We see that represented through the Eye of Cleopatra, which was taken from Egypt and now is at the Thames in London. We also see a replica of that same principle in the Washington Monument in DC, or also by the obelisk in the Vatican, also in Rome.
Freemasonry. Some scholars date it back to the building of the Temple of Solomon and the story of Hiram Abiff, if I pronounced that correctly, which would predate Christianity. Others point to the Knights Templar, while many would argue that Freemasonry, as we know it today, began with the creation of the Grand Lodge. Could you please give some understanding of the origins of Freemasonry, touching, if you can, on the possible starting points mentioned?
Freemasonry is originating from an old traditional craft, the stonemasons. I see the origin of Freemasonry in the lodges, which were the lean-to structures on cathedral building sites. And those lodges, both in Middle Ages and also today, had some stories or contents, and that was King Solomon's temple. They said, where was building and craft coming from? It was the main big building at those times, but King Solomon's times. He built a magnificent building in Jerusalem, which was unique in those times, and not only Solomon was involved, but also architects from neighboring countries. And when you mention Hiram Abiff was an architect from the neighboring, from the Lebanon, a Phoenician. And the Phoenician architecture was deriving from the Egyptian architecture. When you see Phoenician temples, they resemble very much the Egyptian temples. So all this knowledge of building, of big, vast buildings, came from old times and were used also in the medieval ages during the construction of cathedrals and castles and bridges and so on. And that's where the origin of craft masonry is coming from. And we follow those traditions. We have similar tools which the old masons used before: square, compass, chisel, hammer, and so on. But we put a symbol on it for our own life.
If you take the great obelisk in Phoenix Park, the Wellington Testimonial, well, we know that Smirk, the architect, was a Freemason, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the obelisk has any Masonic connections, simply because obelisks were used for monuments throughout Europe and indeed in America. This is the most astonishing example of a monument. It's a monument in Cumber in County Down to Major General Sir Robert Rollo Gillespie, and at the bottom of the column and the plinth it has overt Masonic symbols, Jachin and Boaz. It's got the 5-pointed and the 6-pointed star. It has the Masonic tools and instruments, Euclid's 47th proposition, the 2 squares on the smaller sides of a triangle equaling the square on the longest side. We have the plumb line, we have the square, we have the compasses, and much else. It's an extraordinarily overt piece of Masonic symbolism in a public square in Cumber in County Down.
A lot of people who would be interested in this subject would look at obelisks in a wide-ranging way. They can range from, you know, a Masonic symbol of power, I suppose, a masculine active power from that perspective, and you've also, you know, it would go right to the other end of the spectrum where you would have people, certain knowledgeable people that would look at obelisks as symbolizing a certain way of harnessing energy. And this is where it gets very interesting and a little bit on the fringe of what we might be used to discussing.
Looking at here is a giant Masonic obelisk, a giant power talisman that was built with religious love and care. A lot of people know this. Remember in Ghostbusters, where the whole building is an antenna for religious power? They didn't think that up. That's in all the Masonic literature. You see, so you think of it like that, and people would say, well, that's in a movie. Well, movies generally reflect life. They just then add some stupid ghosts and goblins to it. Let's be clear. I don't believe that they're really pulling energy and power into their phallus and energizing themselves to be God men. They believe it.
From a Masonic point of view, whether it be cathedrals or lodges and temples or even monuments, is that they use the stone as an allegory for the human being himself, in that if, to use the Hermetic axiom, as above so below, in other words saying that we ourselves as individuals are a microcosm of the macrocosm, or the cosmos, as above so below in that respect. And in a way that if they can, I believe that the belief is that if you can represent cosmic structure and cosmic principles in stone masonry building, they act as a sort of magnetic talisman, if you will, on the material, in the material world, linking us through mathematics and geometry with the celestial realms. This might sound sort of high-flying and a little bit speculative as well, but you know, we do find that the more we go back into ancient traditions, the more that we find this to be the case.
The obelisk naturally refers to the sun. The sun's rays, it's also a symbol of power, but it does not necessarily have a Masonic connection.
Not a Masonic symbol.
No connection.
Being that they say that they're not a secret society, but they're a society with secrets.
I've come across symbols and lodges and elements of Freemasonry in literature and film and television, in graveyards, buildings, public parks, public monuments. I am at a stage now where I realise that the Freemasonry organisation is probably more powerful today than ever it has been.
An untold history of Ireland's Symbols in stone. Coming soon.